Hi, and welcome again. This is Customizing the Curriculum, an assessment of the impact of federally funded OER. And the link to our slides is at tinyurl.com/fed-OER, and it's in our session description if you want to follow along. I'm Amy Hoffer, statewide Open Education Program Director with Open Oregon Educational Resources. And Chandra, do you want to unmute and introduce yourself also?
Yeah, I'm Chandra Lewis, and I'm with RMC Research in Portland, Oregon, and I directed the research with Amy.
Okay. So here we go. Open Oregon Educational Resources promotes textbook affordability for community college and university students and facilitates widespread adoption of open, low-cost, high-quality materials. Please visit the openoregon.org website for more information showcasing what's happening across the state. And we partnered with RMC Research to write a grant proposal. Oh, darn, I forgot to tell you about our grant. So we received two grants actually to develop openly licensed course materials with an equity lens in human development and family studies, sociology, and criminal justice. And that's what we're going to talk to you about today. We partnered with RMC Research. They helped us write the grant proposal, collect and analyze data, and report on our findings. And RMC Research helps service providers meet their goals and understand the impact of their work to improve opportunities and outcomes for families, schools, and communities. So one of our grants was a federal open textbook pilot grant. And so we had some required project measures. We needed to report on student savings, average cost savings per student, and total cost savings for students. We also needed to report on student outcomes. So overall grades in the courses, in our pilots, and DFW rates, which stands for letter D, fail, and withdraw. And we also had some additional measures that we used to evaluate our project design. So we looked at students' affective experiences in open textbook pilot courses, and we looked at instructors' changes to their teaching practices as a result of their participation with our project. So the finding that we're really excited to share about, right off the bat is that student savings were nearly double our estimate. We far exceeded our target. Over 7,000 students saved about $730,000 as a result of adopting the open educational resources that we created through our grant. And the average cost savings per student was $112. So this really is a win for our project, and it's also a big win for the students that saved all this money that they otherwise would have spent on commercial textbooks. So, we feel like, we know that the open education field is very focused on affordability, and we feel like that's a really justifiable focus because this is so important for students. And it's such a big barrier to student success. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Chandra to talk about the student outcomes data.
All right, can you pull up all the parts of the slide for me, Amy? Thank you so much. Okay, so there were several data sources. First, we gathered grades from spring 2022 to summer 2024 to assess drop, fail, and withdrawal rates and grades. And when we examined the data, we defined the treatment group as students in universities and community colleges in Oregon, in which faculty used a textbook developed for this project between spring 2022 through summer 2024. And the treatment group included about 3,000 students. The comparison group were students in universities and community colleges in Oregon who took the same courses as the treatment group. However, the faculty were not using the textbook developed by the project. And we also had faculty and students complete surveys at the end of each pilot course. All right. And when we were examining DFW rates and grades, we really wanted to see if there were any differences by faculty. So for the analysis, we defined high implementing faculty as those who reported on the faculty survey utilizing at least 4 of the 6 best practices listed on this slide. Okay. All right, so our first major finding, students in the open textbook pilot courses achieved higher average grades than students in the comparison group. And when the results were broken out by high implementing faculty, the average grade was even higher. Even though the grades were significantly higher, you can see they were all around a B. So this makes the next slide even more interesting when we broke it out by grades. So students in the pilot course were more likely to earn an A than students in the comparison group. Additionally, students of high implementing faculty were even more likely to earn an A. So you can see about 53% of the comparison group received an A, but it was as high as 63% for students in the high implementing faculty group. So unfortunately, we did not see lower DFW rates with our treatment group. Yet, when we narrowed it down to students of the high implementing faculty, we did see the lower DFW rates with these students than in the comparison group.
Okay, so I'm going to also tell you about our additional measures that I mentioned earlier. In terms of student experience findings, we did meet this measure. 71% of our students reported increased motivation, interest, engagement, and academic confidence compared to other courses that they've taken. And a few of the things that students said are on this slide, and I'll read them out. So one student responded to the open pedagogy design of the textbook. I genuinely loved how down to earth the textbook was. I loved that other students wrote it and I could relate it back to myself. Another student responded to the universal design of the textbook. So they said, what worked best for me was videos in tandem with the textbook for assignments. I like having videos because it makes me more confident in my understanding of the textbook. Another student responded to the compassion that they saw in the design of the course. They said, I really liked how the course had a free textbook. It was nice not to worry about an additional class cost. I also appreciated how the instructor gave us 2 extensions over the term. Life happens, and it felt nice to be acknowledged like that. And another student expressed pleasant surprise. Overall, I loved the course. I wasn't expecting to, but the way it was structured was very eye-opening, and I learned a lot. And we also met the measure that we expected to see for instructors changing their practices. So 87% of instructors changed at least one of their practices in a pilot course. 74% changed at least one practice in another course. And we have, again, some quotes from instructors sharing. So one person said, based on my work with Veronica, I changed much of what I was doing in other courses. And it is definitely changing, improving, I hope, how I access and create materials to share with students. Another instructor said, I loved the tools for course design and have applied the concepts to other courses. Somebody else said, working with Veronica is the bomb, which is true. That's our overall findings, and I want to shift gears a little bit and present some findings for nerds. Please don't leave because we will have time for Q&A for everybody, not just nerds. Um, so when we wrote our grant proposal back in 2020, we set our student outcome targets to match the reporting in the 2018 Colvard, Watson, and Park article titled The Impact of Open Educational Resources on Various Student Success Metrics. And I gotta say, we did not meet those targets very well in order to exactly replicate the Colvard et al. Findings. As Chandra mentioned, there was an exception. So there was a subgroup of what we called high implementing instructors who exceeded those targets. And I will say that, there were some differences in our study designs that might be contributing to our not replicating those results. And I also relied on literature review work done by my colleague Jen Lantrip at Pacific University to look at other studies that did not replicate the Colvard et al. Findings. And in particular, there was a paper published by Megan Dempsey called The Impact of Free and Open Educational Resource Adoption on Community College Student Achievement and Course Withdrawal Rates. And I really appreciated her take on not replicating those findings because she points out that the relationship between student withdrawal and open textbook adoption, that's not necessarily a causal relationship. It might be a correlation. And we would need to have a mixed methods study. Like we would need to have some qualitative follow-up to understand whether there was a relationship between a student withdrawing or getting a D or failing, whether there's any relationship with the course materials adopted by the instructor. So that was a pretty big eye opener for me. Um, but I do want to just say, on the whole, we are very happy to share our student outcome results. Like overall, it's really positive and encouraging. Our study found higher average grades for students in our open textbook pilot courses. We found more A grades overall. We found lower DFW rates when students had instructors who implemented best practices during pilot course development. Like we're really happy to have results that assert the importance of working with an instructional designer. But it does really pop out to me that we didn't replicate the findings of a very influential study. And Chandra, who is a professional researcher, tells me that replication studies are really important because they build a body of evidence that we use to make decisions as a field. And sort of the signature finding that we did not replicate any way we sliced and diced the data was the Colvard et al. Finding that historically underserved students in their study saw the greatest benefit from the use of open textbooks. And rather, in our findings, we found that our open textbooks effectively supported all students, regardless of Pell status, race and ethnicity, or their part-time and full-time status. To me, this kind of raises some questions about there's conversations going on about the research agenda for open ed in general. And what I would love to sort of tease out what this means. But before we do that, I want to leave you with a few links. So if you go to Open Curriculum Project Soft Launch, that's where you can find all of our open textbooks and our open course packs that I mentioned. I'm very proud of the work that our authors and instructors did, and I'm excited to share those. More Bang for No Bucks is our student savings findings, and Strong Design, Strong Outcomes is more on our student outcomes findings. So with that, I am going to stop talking and see if there's any questions. I'll look at the chat here for a moment. And so let's see, we do have a few really good questions. So I'll jump in here on the questions in the chat. And I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing so that we can see each other a little bit better. So how were the faculty compensated to create these materials? So we received, our first grant was a GEAR Governor's Emergency Education Relief, like pandemic relief funding grant. And our second grant was a federal open textbook pilot grant. So that was how we were able to pay instructors to work on the textbooks and also to pilot them and contribute their course materials to the project. I think that's what you mean, Jennifer. If you have like a different question about how they were paid, please follow up in the chat. Oh, thumbs up. Thank you. Sarah asks whether there was a standardized test, and the answer is no. We were looking at final course grades. And Chandra, do you want to talk a little bit about that data that we got from the HEC?
Yeah, so we worked with the HEC in Oregon to get the course grades from the treatment courses and from the comparison courses. So we just received a very large data set from them and looked at the course grades.
Thank you. Do you have a link to the study results and where can we obtain the entire results? So I shared those, and when we stop talking, I'll grab those links and paste them. I'm just bad at pasting and talking at the same time. Chandra has put in her email address and I put in mine as well. We're really happy to answer follow-up questions. Ben says, thank you for highlighting the A grades. I believe we too often focus on the DFWs, which can be particularly uninformative given the variety of reasons why students ultimately fail or withdraw. Yeah, thanks for saying that, Ben. And I really do recommend taking a look at Megan Dempsey's paper that is cited in our slides, because she is advocating for mixed methods studies that can kind of go more in depth and like tease out some of the why behind this. So we just didn't design our study to be able to really answer the questions that started coming up for us. And then we were like, I was like, well, what about this question and this question? And Chandra was like, that's exploratory and we need to stop. Rightly so. Rich says there was mention of video content. Any differences in the nature of content used in the control versus the treatment? Rich, that's a really good question. And in the comparison group, so meaning everyone else that was not in our open textbook pilot courses, we don't know what materials they used. So they could have used OER, they could have used commercial textbooks, they could have used no textbook at all. We don't know. They're just everybody else who wasn't in our pilot. So I hope that answers that question. Um, Jennifer says, I've noticed that the OER materials I've used are not as rigorous as publisher materials. How did you maintain rigor? Well, my kind of standard answer with anything to do with open educational resources is it depends, right? And we, in this particular project, we had a bunch of different steps to ensure rigor. So when we wrote the instructors wrote the outlines of the books, and those outlines were peer reviewed by other Oregon instructors to make sure that they would meet the needs. We had an instructional editor who was working with the authors. And also on our leadership team, we had an equity consultant, we had a research consultant, we had an open education instructional designer. We had a lot of different kinds of support. And then the manuscripts went through peer review as well. We piloted the textbooks in our courses and we received feedback from students. We also had a workforce advisory board that provided feedback both on the course outlines and on the assessments in the courses. So we really did a lot to solicit feedback, and then we pulled that all back in for our revising authors to then, create the launch versions of the textbooks, which is what we're releasing. So, I suppose the proof is in the pudding, right? The open textbook library does post-publication peer reviews. But yeah, we're feeling like these are like very, aligned to Oregon needs. They're designed with an equity lens. They're very accessible. They have like a very strong universal design approach, thanks to Veronica Vold, our open education instructional designer. Um, so I hope that answers your question. But the thing about the rigor piece is that you've really got to evaluate any open educational resource just as you would with any commercial resource, right? Like you want to make sure that it's really relevant and aligned to what your students need and aligned to your course outcomes. So I feel that it's sort of a case by case. Brian says, wow, please include all these process details in public documents when you publish them. I think a lot of other places would like to hear about that model. Brian, thank you. So we did just soft launch our open curriculum development model that Veronica and I created that shares not exactly the process that we did, but what we learned and what we would like to do if we have millions of dollars again to do another round of textbook creation. So again, when I stop talking, I'll find that link and paste it in the chat. It looks like someone has taken their mic off of mute. Do you want to ask a question? Okay, maybe not. Um, I'll just give a pause for people to gather their thoughts and see if there are other questions or comments. So does anyone feel brave and want to weigh in about the idea of more replication studies of the Colvard et al. Findings and the idea of, replicating or not replicating their research results? Carrie Ann says, in the future, where can we find your open textbooks and public documents? Okay, let me grab some links. 1 second, please. Okay, so this link is the soft launch. So that's where you can find the textbooks and course packs that we created as a result of this grant. Here's our student savings findings. And this last link is going to be the student outcomes findings. And 1 second while I grab our open curriculum development model. So here is how we did it, or how we hope to do it again. Um, Soft launch, right here, right now at the Open Ed conference. Yeah, thanks, Sarah. We have 2 minutes if someone wants to ask a quick question. How are you able to maintain long-term Pressbooks licensing for your repository? Oh, Ben, that's a good question. So that comes out of the baseline Open Oregon Educational Resources budget, which is pretty stable because it relies on state funding. However, Oregon is heading into a cuts budget. So keeping a hold of our Pressbooks um, network is quite a high priority, and it's also like a pretty big line item. So I think that might be the kind of perspective that you're coming from with that question. But we didn't purchase the access to Pressbooks using soft money. It was not purchased on grant money.
Thank you for answering that question. The motivation is because I'm connected with a grant in Massachusetts called Rotel, and that grant just wrapped up, and that was a big concern: is how are we going to maintain our own licensing for our repository?
Ben, you're a little bit quiet, but I think what you were saying is that you got access to Pressbooks on soft money, and now there's a sustainability concern. So yeah, and we're almost at time. Thank you so much for hosting, Brandon, and thanks, Chandra. Thanks, everybody.